Now you worked, you got your pay, not in your hand, and went to the superintendent. And that money went to the government or to the church. That's why we still have so much money in the coffers, of the government coffers, and they estimate now it's about $55 million. And we worked, and that was 2 and 6 a week in the beginning. It's a lot of money to make $55 million, a lot of hours of working. And so we weren't allowed to have money. Remember 1967, under law with the referendum, in reality for a lot of our people, not all, because some of us lived in the city areas, but you first had the right to open up a bank account. You could further your education, seek your own employment, make your own marriage arrangements, apply for a passport, all that 50 years ago. So the impact on people, as a race of people, we are still going through that, but we are survivors, we are still here. That's the other powerful thing I keep telling the younger generation. But the influence of coming in with everything else now is really devastating. Now, going back to Cherbourg, originally we had people from all over. My wife remembers we had groups living in different areas, and up the top camp, they had people up there who used to do the crocodile dance. We don't have crocodiles in Cherbourg. They'd freeze in Baramba Creek in the winter. Those people were brought down from North Queensland. And so when they were brought down, they didn't stop their language, they didn't stop their culture. They were a people, proud of their culture. So they do the crocodile dance, and they speak, the language they used to speak back there was Guku Imagine Kuki Alanji, which we still have in North Queensland. And so it's interesting, the mixture of the people, it was a real dumping ground. Then they said that they had to change the name of the mission from Baramba. And that was our own Aboriginal language under the Waka Waka language structure. The reason was, they said, because they had Baramba cattle station and the mail was going to the wrong place and they wanted to change it. So what happened? We got changed to Cherbourg after France. Very Aboriginal. It was to commemorate all the Australian soldiers killed there during the First World War. So we got a European name of Baramba. Oh, sorry, Cherbourg, from Cherbourg in France. That's how we got that name. But interestingly, in the 1950s to 1950 to 2001, they then changed it to the electorate of Baramba. They give the white people the name, but we couldn't have our name. So we got Cherbourg after France. And that was to Christianise and civilise, and people wouldn't look at us as being the black mission. So all these little things play into that. Then eventually, you imagine the children being removed non-stop into the dormitory structure. And the other thing I didn't say, some of you guys will know and research, the Royal Society of London found out we're the only black race you can successfully breed out the black in 2 to 3 generations. The reason being, we have a recessive gene in our skin pigmentation. So we can be bred out by breeding with white very, very quickly. Interestingly, we do not have a throwback unless we marry into another dark race. Into our own race, who's darker, or into South Sea Island or whatever, Malay, and we can have that throwback. But in reality, we have a recessive gene. I'm going to read you quickly. I know I talk too much, but if you challenge me, please. The Assimilation Breeding Out Program. In 1947, the year I was born, each state had a Minister for Aboriginal Welfare under the Aboriginal and Opium Protection Act. Now, Western Australia had one minister there for all of that big state. His recommendation in 1947, the year I was born, it says, and this is from Blood on the Wattle by Bruce Elder, it says, A.O. Neville, the West Australian Commissioner of Native Affairs, claimed in 1947 that he had the scientific solution to the Aboriginal problem. When you go through history, it's important to go through world history. Hitler had the scientific solution 3 years before that. This was after Hitler. Scientific research, he claimed, had revealed that the skin pigmentation could be bred out of Aboriginals in 2 to 3 generations. Then what was his recommendation? If only he could have the money and the legislative power to start a selective breeding program, he could, in a matter of 60 to 70 years, solve the Aboriginal problem. We were a problem because we were dark and a white policy, by breeding a race of white Aboriginals for the White Australia policy. So when you look at that, it was a documented, researched, scientific theory and worked of assimilation breeding out. So what happened after that? Mass dormitories set up and removal of children. And what were we filed under? I have, I'll just show you. I've got them here somewhere. Oh, here's one. My mum-in-law. We come under the Aboriginal and Protection and Restriction of the Sale of Opium Act, right? You didn't have a birth certificate. You were documented by the government, and that's why a lot of our older people, they still don't have real birth certificates. It's got Maudie Solomon, my mum-in-law. Now, Solomon, because named after the Solomon Islands, and she grew up on Fraser Island. See, remember the Kanaka slave traders, they called it, came into Mackay and into Maryborough. They were the two major ports in Queensland where they brought the slaves in. And so it's got breed. We didn't come under humans, we were under breed. You think of animals like pigs, chooks, cows, whatever, we were bred. And breed was half caste. And then it goes through the children and so forth. So they're all under that structure of half caste. My grandfather, it's got on his, Godfrey Stanley Higgs, breed half caste, born in Gympie, 1892. It's got nationality, Aboriginal, mother Aboriginal and Kanaka o Tahiti. So that's how I could trace back. And her name was Tiare Maitiopoi Tavita. And Tiare means a little white flower with a perfume. Maitiopoi means little brown pearl of the sea. And Tavita were the tahuna. They were the high priests. They were a very bloodthirsty little lot, but they were the navigators. So I now lecture in navigation at 2 universities in Hawaii and 3 in New Zealand in Polynesian migration and navigation. So that's how we were filed under that structure. And then when you look at that, for the assimilation breeding out programs, what they would do, I mean, this one here, the stolen children, it's got, all they had to do was take a photograph of our people, the children. And because we would come under the title of half caste, quarter caste, quadroon, octoroon, and then we were building up, we were getting more and more light-skinned kids everywhere in all our missions and reserves. And in Cherbourg, what they do? They blamed our young women for taking white people from Mergen astray. We're 5 kilometres out from Mergen. They would sneak out there to find the women, right? And then the children born were light-skinned. And as they were building up all these light-skinned children, then they wanted to get them out into white society. So it says, homes are sought for these children. So the local missionaries would take photographs, and the local papers, and also the main, like Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane papers would take photographs and say, homes are sought for these children. And it's got a group of tiny half-caste and quadroon. So when you're half-caste and quadroon, they automatically, oh, they're lighter. We can look after them. They can work for us. And this one here, I read the original files. It says, I'd like the little girl marked with the X as she is light-skinned. If she is not available, I'll take the little one next to her. She is also light-skinned, only if they are hard workers. That one looks like 3 and that one looks like 5. You had to be hard workers. And then when you go a bit further and you look at our people, my great aunt, I don't know which one she is in it, it says, cheap labour. Aboriginal children under government protection are used to pull a plough. This is in Weipa in the 1930s. Here's all the children chained up to a plough from about 5 to 11, and there's the minister with the plough behind it, and they're pulling the plough. That happened everywhere. There was other things you did as well. So when you look at all these things, we were not quite human, so it eased the conscience in that theory of science that we were black and we were right down the bottom and we weren't really worth anything. And the theory was, in the White Australia policy in 1901, the full bloods would die out, the light skins could be bred out to keep Australia pure white stock. That was the theory in 1901. So, as I say, we have survived all that in that era. And then we had the study of phrenology, the measurement of our heads, and they'd get an Aboriginal skull, a European skull, fill it up with sand in the brain cavity, pour it into the scales, weigh it. The European skull held more sand, so therefore his brain was bigger, therefore he was more intelligent. This was the theory of their science of phrenology, which of course is now proved wrong. And you trace that back, because you always look for the background and where it started. And you go back to England, medieval Europe and England, they would, when a child was born, they'd measure its head, they'd feel the cranium, the stooches in the skull, and they believed through science back there they could tell if that little child's going to grow up to be a liar, a murderer, or a thief, all this theory. So they were still practicing that on our people after colonisation. They used every means they possibly could in that area. So when you look at that, we have survived. But going quickly back to Cherbourg, I dread going to Cherbourg now. It upsets me. I don't know about you, brother, but I see what's going on. We have some really good, decent people out there. But the younger generation, not all, but a percentage. And when you go back, it's the parenting skills and what's not happening. And now the alcohol, even though we're supposed to be banned, but I'm in contact every week and I know who's drunk and who's doing what. And I said, well, how? You know? I said, we could get a job smuggling all around the world, I think. But anyways, and the problems now with the parents. But then you've got to go back and look at two sides. Remember, children were removed to the dormitories. Parents had no say. Parents could not look after their children. Parents could not hug their children, love their children, discipline their children. So that was taken away over about 3 to 4 generations. Then when the dormitories closed down and we got so-called dog at land and whatnot, you remember Auntie Nellie Sheraton? Yeah, Auntie Nellie was my aunt, right? And she grew up in Woorabinda for a while. She got sent to Woorabinda when she was 13 because she slapped the matron across the face with a wet cloth because the matron called her a gin. And she says, I'm not a gin, my name is Nellie. And she slapped her across the face. Well, she got sent to Woorabinda as punishment, which was our punishment settlement. And Auntie Nellie used to tell me, she said, oh, now we got our land back, I'm going to buy my house finally. Didn't happen. We weren't allowed to own houses on the land. So all these little things. And of course, what happens? Parents now, because they've had no bringing up by their parents in a lot of cases, not all, but a lot of cases. And what do you do as a parent? My kids are not going to go through what I went through. So they go the opposite way and give them too much and spoil them and stick up for them. No matter if that little Johnny went down the road and smashed 14 windows or whatnot, mother going to say, no, he was home with me, he didn't go down there. But 6 people might have seen him. So they stand up for the children. So the children are used to getting out of things. And of course, when they hit 18, the big house, jail, then all of a sudden, drama. And that's why we have a lot of deaths in custody. I mean, that's a part of it. There's a lot more involved. But so we're going through that now, and let all our communities, the problems we have with drugs and alcohol, crack, ice, marijuana's always been there, and that's getting out of hand. Because, as you know, it's killing our people. It's killing all people. I mean, I work with the Murray courts in Toowoomba, and I got so many young fellas I counsel. I had Tuesday, I had 13 or 15 guys on Tuesday. And a lot of it's to deal with drugs and so forth, and DVOs and things like that when they're under influence of drugs or alcohol. And I had one young lady at court, and she was so high on ice, she fell off the chair in front of the magistrate. I mean, a shame, but that's what happens, you know. And so, and they grow up and they think this is normal, and it's not normal. And this is a big problem we have to deal with. Not, as I said, not just on our missions, it's happening everywhere. I mean, if anyone's been to Amsterdam, I mean, a lot of things are legal over there. I saw this, he was from the Dutch East Indies in the Caribbean. He's reggae hair and he's riding his push bike, and you could hear the boombox going, you know, Buffalo Soldier, and he's really going, you know. Anyway, the guys on the bus stop, the white Dutch guys, are like this to him, whistling. And he comes over, and I'm standing at the bus stop and thinking, oh, okay, he must know them. You know, real naive I am. I don't even smoke. But anyway, what happened? I'm watching, and he hand in his bag, at his little bum bag, we call it, and he pulls out this little white powder in a little satchel, and he slaps him on the hand like that, and he goes like that. Then he goes underneath. You think he was doing a welcome like our Murray ones, you know, handshake. Anyway, then I'm watching. Anyway, the little white packet of powder goes on top of his hand, then he puts his hand underneath, and the guys in his fingers got the notes, and he pulls the notes out. He's done a deal. 11 o'clock a day at the bus stop. And I went, oh, that's interesting. You know? So, I mean, it's everywhere. So it's not just our people. And that's the thing. What have I missed? Oh, Bunya Mountains, yes. From my research and what my grandfather used to tell me, it's very interesting because here, Europeans said we had no idea of commercialism. We were prehistoric, not quite human, and what do we know about anything commercialism? Challenge that 100-fold. Now, the Bunya Mountains, our Bunya nut trees, because we say anything that's important has a double name, Bunya Bunya. We have a club, it's not called Nulla, it's called Nulla Nulla. The Europeans name things after our language. What we have in New South Wales? Wagga Wagga. So when it's a double name, it's the importance of it. So the importance of the bunya nut, the bunya, pines and the nuts are full of protein. They're very good. And they're a food source which can be protected, looked after, and last. You can grind it to a flour, make it a Johnny cake, or you call it now, or a little damper, and you can dry it. And you can use it in a year's time just by adding water. It's preserved. So what happens? They come on roughly every 3 years. So the people around here would send out runners or messengers. Now we had runners or messengers. They carried no weapons, right? They had the design on their chest and the artwork of their clan groups where they belonged to. And what did they carry? A message stick. It could be either burnt or carved patterns or painted patterns. That message stick, even though it didn't literally say anything on it, they knew where it come from and what it was about, and they were like a passport. You imagine we had up to 600 to 800 languages in this whole country, originally, they estimate. How do we communicate? W.R. Roth, a medical practitioner from Cherbourg Island in the late 1800s, he was a botanist and so forth as well, and also anthropologist. He documented our sign language. We used over the whole continent one sign language, which is so interesting. And they say in our linguistics that it was so unique, it was equivalent to another spoken language. So what do you do today when you have sign language for people who can't read, can't hear and can't speak? They use the sign language, and it's documented. We had that long before Europeans arrived, which is interesting. So they'd send out messages or runners, and they'd go to all the areas around, but some were not close. They had to go a long way, a few weeks traveling. And as they were coming into another community, another clan group of people, the warriors would watch. Someone's coming, they're strangers. Are they a threat to our people? And so what would happen? As they got closer, they'd see their hand out with the message stick, and they were carrying no weapons. As they got closer, their body art, the totem structure, where they belonged, and straight away they knew they were coming with a message. So messengers or runners were given protection, food, and safe passage through the land. And they were making arrangements with the next group to say, the bunya nuts are going to be ready at a certain time. Give it another month or so forth. Always before, that way give them time to get organised and to make that long track down. Because it wasn't just the men, it was the women and the children. They all come down for the bunya season. And what they do in this area here, highly organised. There were certain trees in certain areas which were allocated to different clan groups. And no one else touched those. And they knew exactly where their trees were and where they could harvest and where they could camp. And so highly organised structure. It wasn't just to get the nuts. What were the people here going to get out of it? They'd bring down things for trade. Now you imagine going further out west, what do we have? Gidgee, mulga, black wattle, hardwood. Makes good boomerangs, good spears. And so they were brought into trade. Red ochre was used for ceremony, for initiation, for death, all sorts of things for ceremony. The red ochre ground up and rubbed on the body. We weren't the only ones to use that. You go to Egypt. If anyone's been to the Museum of Antiquities in Cairo, I've been there about 5 times. And red ochre, the pharaohs had red ochre rubbed all over before they were bandaged up in the linen. And so it's interesting to see. And so they brought that down to trade, coolamans, the wooden bowls, or pitchy or woody, many names for them. And that was the trading thing. And the next thing, what they do, to settle disputes, marriage arrangements, because we had no inbreeding in this country. Our culture was so organised, you could do a PhD on our marriage arrangements quite easily, still today. Very in-depth, but works. And then for settling disputes. Interesting, I have a degree in conflict resolution mediation with the Attorney General's Department. We did that long before Europeans arrived. Conflict resolution and mediation. It was a little bit harsher. For instance, if there was a problem, when the clan groups would come in, they'd have a place all cleared, no stones, no rocks, all nice and smooth. Then the one clan group would have the problem with the other clan group. Their family would sit up that end, the women and the children, everybody witnessed, and the elders, the same down the other end. Then the elders on both sides would talk about the problem loudly, so everybody could hear. And then the warriors come out to do battle with each other to settle that dispute. They could club them, they could spear them in the leg. Right, very rarely happened, but they could not put anyone to death because that would continue on the problem. And so what would happen? The elders would talk about what the problem was, and who was the mainstay to keep our men going? The women. And what the women do? they yelled out loudly and challenged the other clan group and tell the women, your men are weak, they're not good warriors. And of course, what did we do? We didn't have clothes. You could see everything. And the first thing they do to make the manhood go down, look at their penises. You know, we say budu, eh? Look at their penises. Small, how can they do any good for you? And everybody's getting all worked up. You know, you can imagine. So now the elders make a sign, the two lots of warriors would come out and do battle in the middle. And everybody witnessing. Now, when it started to get out of hand, because the women are screaming out and yelling and getting the men all riled up, as they still do, you know. Anyway, and so when it was getting out of hand, and the elders agreed, it's gone far enough, we settled that dispute, they'd make signs to each lot of elders, and then the elders would talk to their women and say, it's finished. And those women then knew their role was running out on the battlefield and putting their arms around their husband's neck and calming them down and taking them back to sit down. It's done, sit down, we're finished. The men are all still worked up and they don't really want to go, but the women get them back, you know, and sit them down. And then the elders are talking about it. Then everybody goes away to their little areas where their campsite is around the area. And then that night, that very night, they'd come together for a big festival, a big corroboree. There'd be food, campfires going, dancing and everything. The whole thing is done. It's not mentioned. So conflict resolution and mediation. Because if a whole clan group is still fighting, it disintegrates. Our elders knew that we had to calm everything down to get it working again. And if we could do that today, we wouldn't have all the wars we have, because our culture did that. So to me, that is really, really a good, powerful point for our cultural structure of survival in that area.